In this episode, what are we going to talk about? China. Of course. We're also going to talk about how China and Panama are increasing their ties. You're only going to find this here. Stay tuned and listen up, my brethren. Okay, guys, what is going on in the China news today? What's your boy going to cover? I'll tell you what I'm going to cover. China's investments and influence in Panama. Problems ahead for the U.S. This is an extremely interesting article because it's basically boasting in the face of the United States, and I'm not exactly sure how it should be taken. So let's read on, shall we? Yes, we shall. In what could be ground zero in the new trade war between the United States, in the new Cold Trade War between the United States and China, I've been calling it a Cold War, the new president of Panama, Laurentino Nito Cortizo, is looking out for interests of his nation. While the U.S. footprint is still present all over Panama, it appears to be eroding, while Chinese influence is increasing. In fact, though all candidates in the presidential election, they're talking about the Panamanian election, avoided the issue on the campaign trail, on the day of his election, Cortizo stated just that. While the U.S. is not paying attention, another one, China, is making advances, he told Reuters. I'll have to check that out in Reuters. He says, but China's push to Panama isn't new. Chinese investment in Panama has been increasing since the late 1990s, when the U.S. returned control of the Canal to Panama, though it has increased substantially in the last several years. So, what do we know right now? First off, this is a pro-Chinese website. I like reading it because it has kind of up-to-date news about what the Chinese are trying to do. I like it because I think it kind of gives you a glimpse into what they're thinking, what the government's thinking. So, you're going to love what's coming down the pipe. Anyway, what's interesting here is that they're calling this a Cold War. I was calling this a Cold War as well. In fact, all you got to do is listen to all my podcasts. Half the time I'm calling this the Cold War with China, because we are attempting to, in my opinion, this is more of an existential situation than is being led on by multiple parties. In fact, I do believe that China, the Chinese government, is trying to surround U.S. interests and U.S. assets around the world as fast as possible, and I think they're becoming fairly successful with it. Now, what's the idea there? The idea is to control the playing field, to control the game board without firing a shot. I don't think the Chinese want to go to war. And I actually don't think they will. However, we don't know what we don't know. And what I mean by that is, and this is everybody, right? And you know what? Kissinger actually is the one that talks about this a bit. One of the biggest possible problems that could happen between major powers is miscalculation of the other. So that's probably the biggest problem, is not intentional fighting between us and China or us and Russia, but it would be an accident. That's probably the biggest worry. Anyway, let's get back to this article, guys. China's push into Panama isn't new. Chinese investment in Panama has been increasing since the 1990s, when the U.S. returned control of the canal to Panama, though it has increased substantially in the last several years. In 2016, the Chinese company Landbridge Group bought the largest port in Panama. I've been talking about the Chinese buying ports, guys. So listen up, bruskies. Landbridge Group is a private company in China, in the Chinese, in the Chinese sense of the word, meaning it is subsidized by the Chinese government, takes orders from the Chinese government, and does nothing without the Chinese government's approval. Well, if that's a private company, then I'm the fucking president. The company has been regarded with suspicion around the world for its questionable ambitions since its acquisition of the port of Darwin in Australia. It was discovered that the company formed its own private military force called the People's Military. The Panamanian port is on the canal's Atlantic side in the Colon Free Trade Zone, which produces about $5 billion a year in trade. Oh, very interesting, my fellow señores y señoras, if I said that correctly. So, this quote-unquote private company, which is totally directed by the Chinese government, owns it actually owns a few ports. It owns the port of Darwin in Australia, and it owns this port in the Free Trade Zone of Panama. Now, listen to this. But this is not and they have their own private military, which it's not the private military, it's public military, because it's run by Beijing. But this is only the latest port acquisition. China owns the majority of ports on both ends of the canal. Furthermore, the two largest infrastructure projects around the canal since its expansion have both been contracted to the China Communication Construction Corporation, which is the world's largest engineering group. Those projects are Atlantic Bridge, which was completed last year, and the recent started new bridge across the Pacific side of the canal. China's intentions are abundantly clear when it comes to Panama. In December 2018, Xi Jinping became the first premier in the history of China to visit Panama. He was accompanied by executives from the Chinese telecommunications, transportations, and construction companies and participated in a trade show while there. The centerpiece of the show was a plan for a proposed $4 billion high-speed rail across the Isthmus of Panama. Xi's visit to Panama is seen by many as a victory lap and challenge to the U.S. for supremacy in the canal-related infrastructure. Panama nearly suffered a complete financial meltdown a few years ago after the completion of the expansion of a canal that promised to bring so much prosperity. With the release of the Panama Papers, major U.S. banks cut ties with the country, and Panama realized it needed investment from somewhere to carry out its vision for implementation of comprehensive logistics strategy. China was more than happy. So far, it says the United States has shown very little public pushback against the Chinese incursion into Panama. Okay, so it also says Panama isn't the first government in the region to strengthen its ties with China recently. Countries across Latin America and the Caribbean have signed onto the Belt and Road Initiative that China launched in 2013, which promises $1 trillion in investment for infrastructure projects around the world to facilitate exportation of Chinese goods. But the Panama Canal feels different. It has always been perceived as such a uniquely American achievement. The Panama Canal was the great work of the industrial age, as symbolic to the U.S. as the Great Wall is to China. Historian and Panamanian political analyst Richard Koester told Foreign Policy. The Chinese plan to develop a permanent presence in Panama. Okay, so anyway, very interesting stuff, guys. Very interesting stuff. Hold on, let me run a couple ads. I'll be right back. Okay, fellows, here's what I take on this. I have talked about before how the Chinese are basically swooping into South America. They have projects. They have Belt and Road Initiative ties to some countries in South America, and they also have other deals throughout South America. Now, this is also very significant because the Chinese are owning lots of ports. Or they're acquiring lots of ports around the world. And I didn't realize they owned the majority or most of the ports. It says China owns the majority of ports on both ends of the canal. So why is that significant? I've said before, one of China's main goals is to secure resources, both for their economy and also, though, for any possible military conflict, I believe. If they ever have to use their military, they want to make sure that they are already stationed in a beneficial position, right? So if they have military stationed around the world at some of the world's most important ports, some of the world's most important canals, if they have military presence there, then that gives them leverage in ensuring that, one, they can move their goods across the world, and two, if they have to stop somebody else's goods, they could do that. Now, at least that's how I perceive this, right? Because they could develop it into a military presence, and then they could start policing waterways, kind of like what we can do. That's one reason why our sanctions are so effective, right? I mean, we can stop trade to countries, and China is setting themselves up to be in that position. So this, in my opinion, this is a problem that nobody's talking about. I think that we should be very, very skeptical and be looking very closely at all of these developments. But we're not. I don't know why, but we're just not doing it. Nobody seems to give a shit. But we should be giving a shit. Everybody should be watching what's going on with China and South America. So at least you're getting it here. Now you know. China has major plans for South America, and they're moving in on Panama. And this article that I read today is intended to be a slap in the face towards the United States. I say that because of the way it was written, right? How the very closing line here, the Chinese plan to develop a permanent presence in Panama. The Panama Canal was a great work of the industrial age as is symbolic to the U.S. as the Great Wall is to China. Now, that's not true, but it is a symbolic work of the United States. And the Chinese are basically saying, look, we're going to move in, and there's nothing you're going to do about it. So the Chinese government and Chinese companies are buying up ports around the world. They could militarize those ports. They could use them for offensive and defensive purposes. So keep that in mind, guys. That's all I got to say for today on China, and stay tuned for some other fun stuff I have in store.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.